In EDH, value is king, especially if your deck does not have an I win combo or finisher in the list. So if your win con is something like dealing damage slowly and incrementally, maybe milling over time, something like that, then games for you will probably go a little bit longer than a fast combo deck, which means you're going to need more value over the course of the game. Otherwise, you'll end up in top deck mode. And you don't want to be in top deck mode during a long game. That's like getting the one crappy slow go-kart at the track. You know the one. This can be mitigated in many ways. Oftentimes having more card draw is, well, an obvious solution, but a lot of the repeatable card draw value engines are often pretty expensive. And that's because these value engines are the best way to make it into the late game with, stuff in hand, things on board. That's why Rhystic Study is arguably the strongest card in Commander. You see it in all of these CEDH long slogfests. This is why in all of my control and mid-range commander decks, I like to build in value engines that will repeatedly let me do something to grind out long games. It's a concept I've talked about a couple of times on this channel. And in this video, I just want to talk about a few practical examples of value engine cards or multiple cards that you can use in your decks. All of these will be as budget friendly as I can make them, and full of cards that I think work somewhat well independently, so you don't just have a crappy combo in your deck. And for pricing, I'm going to be using Cool Stuff Inc., who sponsor the channel, which means if you pick up these cards from there, you can use code TTM, and not only does it support the channel, but you get a discount as well, making the cards even cheaper. Thanks to Cool Stuff Inc. for sponsoring the video. Okay, let's put together a few value engines. Starting with a card I really love, Oversold Cemetery. This is already a great card by itself. It's free value every upkeep, as long as you got dudes in the yard already. So how do we turn this into, let's say, card draw? Well, there's a few options here. Cycling cards can be great. It's like a free cantrip in hand every turn. And when paired with cards that do something when they cycle, you're not just cantripping every turn, but you're actually doing an effect. Although that's just one card. What if we could get more? Utilizing creatures with enters effects that draw cards and sacrifice outlets, you can really churn through your list pretty fast with the Cemetery. How about Baleful Strix and Vampiric Rites in addition to the Cemetery? You can play the Strix, draw a card, it's a great card already. You deter blockers because who wants to swing into your Death Touch creature? And then you just sack it to the Vampiric Rites, draw another card, get the Strix back, replay it, draw another card. And the best card is you can just hold up your 2 mana for any interaction you might have, and if you don't need to spend it, you just get to draw the extra card. Or don't, and then get a different creature back from your yard. Instead of Vampiric Rites, or sack outlets in general, we can play something like Mentor the Meek. And how about skipping some of that extra card draw and instead repeatedly edicting your opponents? Mentor the Meek with a Fleshbag Marauder and Oversold Cemetery is pretty powerful. Not only can the Marauder already put itself in the yard, which sets itself up to just be looped by the Cemetery over and over again, but with the Mentor of the Meek, you're drawing an extra card every single turn for 1 additional mana. And the repeatable edicts can be very powerful against creature-based strategies, especially Voltron. And there are a dozen other ways to loop ETB effects. One of the best ones you can put in your command zone right now is the Jolly Balloon Man. Man, this card is so sweet. I'm sure you've already seen a lot of things with this. I mean, just the Balloon Man and a Combustible Gearhulk is pretty fun. But let's say you don't want to loop ETB effects. That's fine. Cemetery plus Chalk Outline is also an excellent piece of synergy. Chalk Outline is a weird card that does stuff when creatures leave your graveyard, and it not only makes a dude that lets you block and attack, but you get a clue as well. And just stacking up clues early on in the game can be really powerful late game. Speaking of clues, Trail of Evidence is one of my favorite budget value engines. This card is excellent for any control shell like Talrand or Baral, which I played Trail of Evidence in both of those lists that I had. But you can also play this in artifact decks that play a lot of instants and sorceries like Galazeth. And when you pair Trail of Evidence with Inspiring Statuary, you can turn those clues into mana, which lets you do some crazy massive turns. Honestly, you don't really need much support for Trail of Evidence to work. You just need to be casting instants and sorceries, and again, stacking up clues in the late game can be really great. Enough about card draw, let's talk removal. I'm sure a lot of players have seen Dictative Erebos and Grave Pact with sack outlets and recursive creatures, blah blah blah. But 1, that's boring because everybody's already seen that. 2, it's not very budget friendly. And 3, it only hits creatures. What happens if you're up against the aforementioned Trail of Evidence Spellslinger deck? Seems pretty bad, right? How about we loop Scourglass? This is a really funky card that nukes the entire board other than artifacts and lands. And it pairs really well with Silas Wren. You can clear the board, and then Silas sticks around because he's an artifact creature. You hit someone and recast the Scour Glass. This is a really powerful value engine that will make your opponents wish they were running Graveyard Hate. It can easily buy you 1 to 2 turns or more in most games, giving you a chance to draw into something you might need. Buyback is an incredibly powerful mechanic, allowing you to reuse a card as much as you want, as long as you got the mana, or whatever the buyback cost is. You might have seen Capsize with infinite mana as a combo, or Constant Miss with a Crucible effect, and those are both great. But how about Spellburst? Okay, I know this card isn't very good, but what if we try to make it a little better? You can use cards like Seedborn Muse to untap all of your lands and just counter something every turn. But Seedborn Muse is a bit of a pricey card. So how about the new Unstoppable Plan? In tandem with Mana Rocks, specifically those that produce a lot of mana, you can create a late game mini lock where you counter and buy back the spell every turn. Real quick, I want to thank my patrons for providing the booze and also suggesting this topic. If you want to join in on stuff like that, check out the link below. Alright, let's move past this card draw removal crap. Let's talk damage. I really like Army in a Can cards. These are cards that just make a lot of dudes by themselves. Field of the Dead is likely the strongest Army in a Can ever printed, and as an aside, should this be a game changer? Like, it's it's a crazy card, right? I think it's stronger than Trinisphere in most decks, right? Anyway, it's also not very budget friendly, so let's talk about some that are. Othari Sun's Glory is a card I have been recently testing out, and it puts in work. The board immediately puts a token down the turn you play it, and once your rebels begin to survive, it gains pseudo immunity to spot removal because you can use the rebel to get the Firebird back into play. I also love that if you're playing any changelings like Formless Genesis, you can use them as rebels to get your Othari back. Speaking of Formless Genesis, this is a crazy card. If you pair it with a simple Dakmor Salvage, you can make a Death Touch Goo Boy every turn. And even better than that, Life from the Loam. You can make 3 Goo Guys every turn, and as you dredge getting more lands in the bin, you're going to make your Goo Lads even bigger. Or with Life from the Loam, you can just make 1 Goo Guy and still hit your land drop. And if you're getting back a cycling land, you could cycle it to draw a card, or dredge the Loam even further and start casting Loam multiple times in a turn. Why stop at 3 Goo Boys a turn? And that's kind of all I got for you today. Value engines that repeatedly draw cards, remove things, put power on the board are really great for any mid-range deck, and I would highly recommend looking for these types of effects in your decks. Find some way that you can loop an ETB, a death trigger, make more dudes out of 1 card, so on and so forth. By doing this, you have a more robust, grindy mid-range game plan, and when you get to those games where there's 2 farewells that have been cast or 3 board wipes, something like that, you're going to really appreciate the slow, grindy value that you can get from little packages like this. And if you keep each individual card as something that is still good in your deck, you're not going to draw one part of the value pile and feel bad about it, because it's in theory something your deck already wants. These were just some cards that do that, create repeatable value. Let me know what you think. Do you play any of these? Are you going to try some of these cards out? And let me know your favorite value engines, Army in a Cans, stuff like that in the comments below. Thank you so very much for watching. Special thanks to my patrons, whose names you see here. If you want to be in the credits, the Discord, any of that type of stuff, check out the link below.